friends, I am Rob the Dungeon Tutor. Welcome to another episode of the Dungeon Tutor. Today, I am going to offer a little unsought for advice. This is something that I've saw as an opportunity and kind of wanted to pounce on because it's something that kind of rankled me for a while. And that is quite simply, in many games, there's the opportunity to play a character of great wisdom, but not one that adheres to traditional wisdoms and knowledges of the surrounding cultures. So, for instance, the monks of Dungeons and Dragons generally are inspired by, derived from the near mythical abilities of monks and martial arts practitioners of the Far East. And certainly that had a cultural fascination for itself. But the thing is, what I've noticed is that a lot of people who play these characters, they're basically playing any other character, just ones that can punch and have other supernatural abilities. And I thought that it would be kind of interesting to kind of show people some other opportunities for different philosophies that might be able to guide such a character along to make them a more interesting and involved character. And in that, I ended up stumbling across this book. And if I butcher the pronunciations of these things, please don't take offense. I'm pretty sure the original author wouldn't. This was the writings of Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, which is the core writings that he passed down, which formed the foundations of Taoism. Now, as far as a philosophy goes, Taoism was ancient, 500 years before the birth of Christ. So this is one of the central influences over Chinese culture, and right up there with Confucianism, which Confucianism is more of this is the right way to live your life, to go day by day. Taoism is more spiritual, more oriented towards a life that doesn't itself exert outward, but kind of rests in a kind of stillness and calmness, and achieves wisdom by casting out all things of desire. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. First of all, from the foreword that kind of sets it in place. And again, this is just to provide you with some ideas that you might yourself use for a variety of characters, including, potentially monks, but, there's a variety of ascetics or opportunities for just instilling a little philosophy into your characters that might give them a dictation on how they live, how they spend their time, how they are productive, how they might avoid certain things or embrace certain things. So, let me just go into. Of course, this is a translation into English, so I'm going to talk about. But Tao means the way. The Tao is the way to live in order to achieve by non-doing. This is a dynamic peace and mystery, neither passivity nor struggle. Tao is the ever-present eternal quality, source, law of creation, and fulfillment. We're going to be dealing with some kind of heavy philosophical issues if you want to cover all of this, but I'm not going to go that far. In modern times, as more people of different cultures meet one another because of their electronic and air travel networks, the way can appear in many traditions and guises. The Taoist way is not dependent on race, creed, or any other cultural form. It's very fluid and mainly demands an openness to truth, the nameless mystery. So many of the tenets for Taoism is Dispelling Illusions. And it talks about all the illusions that people make for themselves, and they have been doing it forever, as long as people have been self-aware, really. So the ideas that Lao Tzu and other philosophers have made is that ultimately our reality is kind of a prison that we make for ourselves. It's formed by the influences that we have and the world that we make ourselves go through. But if you can look beyond that, if you can cast off some of those illusions, you can start seeing things the way they really are. And the core of what reality is laid bare to a person who really does dare to look beyond the boundaries of what they think they know and realize that they don't know as much as they do, and that by understanding those things, they understand the world around them even better. For the Taoist, nature and spirit interpenetrate. In spirit there is nature, and in nature there is spirit. So it's oneness with the world around you and understanding your place in it. The mystery of the way can never be explained or named, but we can live it. No matter what we think, say, or do, we are embraced by the way. Taoism uses the metaphor of water for the way, for it has innumerable forms and yet is always the same. Okay, that's some good stuff. Once we lose the way in this subject-object abyss, innumerable are the ills that grow out of it. So casting aside truth and choosing to embrace illusion is the way to destruction and denial of the soul, the spirit, and believing that spirit and nature are separate is part of that illusion. So in a way, this could be something very vital to people who are more bound with nature. Perhaps Druids might have a certain Taoist sentimentality to it. Not necessarily believing in spirit as in the God that presides over nature, but necessarily that there is an overall way that encompasses the natural world and the way that life springs up, as well as people and their roles, and that trying to deny the spiritual side of a person by closing yourself in and throwing yourself into worrying about things that are illusionary, well, that seems like that might fit in with some Druids and Rangers too. So you'll, I think, possibly come to appreciate that this philosophy could be useful for a wide variety of applications for role play. And the Tao, the way, is the eternal harmony of heaven, the human, and earth at all times and places. It is ever renewed and yet inexhaustible. Some nice sentimentalities. So, there are 81 passages. Yeah, 81 passages to the Tao Te Ching. And I'm going to cover one. If you like this and enjoy it and want to see me do more, leave in the comments. Because each one of these passages does talk about a different aspect of Taoism, but also of its own philosophy that a person might embrace and might be interesting in a way to defining a character that you might think of playing, or at least marking them away from the nearly inexhaustible urge that draws characters forward to adventure, to try to acquire more and more powerful items and things. Whereas a person who would embrace some of these philosophies would be content to allow life to draw them through adventure, but as they go through that passage and they grow, perhaps it leads them to open up and embrace a different outlook. A Taoist way of looking at adventuring might be, pretty shockingly different, and might lead a person to different outlooks, different activities that they might look at the way everyone else composes themselves and go, maybe not so much. So this is the first. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in nature. This appears as darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. So, what does that mean? The thing about philosophy is that philosophy has kept philosophers occupied and employed for generations. Because there's no one right meaning, is there? To me, what it means is fairly simple, though. And ultimately, when you boil it down, a person's philosophy often should be fairly simple. The more complicated it is, the more it's going to hinge on, different truths that may not always be true, or a lot of other things that are just kind of harder to put together and analyze. But in this, the way I see it is that trying to be a person who follows the Tao and actively trying to classify this philosophy of life and this way of thinking is ultimately folly. Because the moment you name something, like even naming Taoism is applying a name and therefore escaping what is important to it. The way is in accepting things as they are without necessarily having to classify everything that exists. It's actually the opposite of the way that a wizard would look at magic, for instance. They learn magical phenomenon and they try to classify it, study it, examine it so that they can replicate it and possibly improve upon it. Which kind of goes against the thrust of the Tao, which in a magical world makes this philosophy seem a little bit more alien. But on the other hand, to a monk, for instance, a monk doesn't use arcane magic. They use inner power. And in a manner of speaking, this reflects the truth of the difference between those two aspects of power. Whereas a wizard relies on what is outside and learns to master it using their disciplines, to somebody who masters this philosophy, striving for power is actually working against your inner nature. By mastering your inner nature, you actually open yourself up to the greater power of the universe. And therefore, monks get truly dynamic powers because they understand that philosophy, and they internalize it, actually accords them different power from the same source. The great powers that control magic also are the powers that well up within a person. They approach them in different ways. So to me, that's kind of emblematic of how this philosophy expresses your character's potential outlook, in that I don't have to go out and necessarily drive myself with the same urgency everybody else has to fill up their life with as much meaning and as much thing that you're driven to. But a person who can step outside of that and not be a prisoner to all of those things, the need to name everything, the need to understand and control what you think is your destiny, leaves you to be the one who is driven yourself, rather than one who can stand above all of that and then act with knowledge of truth and with true wisdom. It's a little bit different. It certainly is. And by reading and understanding that, it does kind of inspire me to want to make a character that tries to live out that kind of philosophy. The role-playing world that you're in is already going to offer opportunities for adventure. By having a character that passively accepts what goes on around them and strives to do the best they can, but not for purposes of being true to oneself and of mastering the selfishness and ambitions, and instead just kind of accepting one's experiences and one's knowledges in a class that actually allows you to empower yourself by doing that, that could be really interesting. And ultimately would help you to not have a character who is just another fighter who doesn't wear armor and punches people instead. I think could be the difference between a character who's kind of relatively unrewarding and one that ends up with a deep personality and a root with this philosophy that could really drive some really good role play. And maybe do you try to proselytize your philosophy? Do you tell other people when you watch them, throwing away their energy dissolutely, or in, soul-killing ambition, greed, revenge, things of that nature that are very passionate, but ultimately don't help the soul, that don't help the self? That could be really interesting to say, to go to somebody. It's like, well, I'm going to go and kill the thing that killed my brother. It's like, your brother's already dead. Driving yourself like that and pushing yourself, doing it for the wrong reasons is actually working against your inner light. And by not embracing, now you're probably not going to turn that other character away from that, but it gives you some interesting talking points and something that you can really look at in role play. I think that looking into things that aren't necessarily related to role play can really help our role play out. This is just one avenue, and I'm interested in doing more. If you're interested in hearing more about the Tao Te Ching, I'm certainly willing to keep going with the different lessons that Master Lao Tzu wrote down. And who knows, something might resonate with you that you'd be interested in, again, adapting a character to it. I'm not saying that I'm a believer in Taoism or anything like that. It's a philosophy, and as such, it's interesting to study. But again, if it's something that helps you to come up with an interesting angle for your character, then it's worthwhile. And I'd be happy to continue exploring that with you if you enjoy it. So, until next time, another session of the Dungeon Tutor is over. I'm Rob, and I'll see you next time, hopefully. Until then, farewell.